The words echoed through the packed auditorium like a gunshot. Agent Nightingale, please stand and be recognized for your exceptional service to this nation. Every head in the room turned to look at me while my father's face went completely white. For 32 years, he'd called me a disappointment. Today, the CIA director just called me a hero. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Dr. Elena Thorne, and this is the story of how I went from family failure to national asset, all while my own father thought I was wasting my life playing with computers. The morning that changed everything started like any other family gathering from hell. I was sitting in my childhood bedroom in Millbrook Heights, scrolling through emails on my laptop, when I heard my father's voice booming from downstairs. Richard Thorne, successful attorney, pillar of the community, and the man who never missed an opportunity to remind me how I'd thrown away my potential. She's 32 years old and still living like a college student. Computer programming. What kind of career is that for someone with her intelligence? She could have been a surgeon, a lawyer, anything respectable. I closed my laptop with more force than necessary. The same conversation, the same disappointment, the same crushing weight of expectations I'd never be able to meet. My mother's softer voice murmured something I couldn't quite catch. Probably another attempt at defending me that would fall on deaf ears. The thing is, my father wasn't entirely wrong about my lifestyle. I did live in a modest apartment in downtown Riverside, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and spent most of my time staring at screens. What he didn't know was that those screens displayed classified intelligence briefings, terrorist communications, and cyber threats that could topple governments. What he didn't know was that computer programming was the cover story for one of the most classified positions in the United States intelligence community. I'd been working for the CIA's Cyber Operations Division for 8 years, recruited straight out of MIT, where I'd earned my doctorate in computer science with a specialty in cryptography. My official title was Senior Cyber Intelligence Analyst, but most people in the intelligence community knew me by my code name, Agent Nightingale. I was the ghost in the machine, the digital shadow that tracked down terrorists through their keystrokes and prevented attacks before they happened. But to my family, I was just Elena, the antisocial daughter who'd wasted her potential on playing with computers. The irony burned deeper than they could possibly imagine. While my father was downstairs criticizing my career choices, I had a secure phone in my purse that connected directly to Langley. While he was lamenting my modest lifestyle, I was carrying a security clearance that took 3 years of background checks to obtain. While he saw failure, the director of Central Intelligence saw someone valuable enough to personally commend. I walked to my old bedroom window looking out at the manicured suburban streets where I'd grown up feeling like an outsider. These were the neighborhoods where success was measured by the size of your house, the prestige of your job title, and how impressive you sounded at dinner parties. Intelligence work didn't translate well to dinner party conversation. I can't tell you what I do, where I work, or who I work with, but trust me, it's important. Doesn't exactly command respect at neighborhood barbecues. My phone buzzed with a text from my handler at Langley. Operation Blackwater concluded successfully. Director wants to see you Monday. Commendation ceremony next week. I stared at the message, a mix of pride and frustration washing over me. Operation Blackwater had taken 6 months of my life. 6 months of 16-hour days, sleepless nights, and tracking a terrorist cell through encrypted communications across 4 continents. We'd prevented what intelligence suggested would have been the largest cyber attack on U.S. infrastructure in history. Power grids, water systems, hospitals, all targeted for simultaneous shutdown that could have killed thousands. And my father thought I was wasting my life. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I was living a life that most people could only dream of. working at the highest levels of national security, trusted with secrets that could reshape global politics. But in my family's eyes, I was the disappointment who'd never lived up to her potential. My younger brother Jake was the golden child, Harvard Law, partnership track at a prestigious firm, married to a doctor, 2 perfect children. He was everything my parents had hoped I would become. What they didn't understand was that I couldn't become what they wanted without giving up who I was. The work I did required a specific kind of mind, a specific kind of dedication, and a willingness to live in the shadows. I couldn't have the flashy career, the social prominence, or the public recognition they valued so highly. My achievements were classified. My successes were buried in government files. And my impact on the world was something I could never share with the people I loved most. Standing in that bedroom, listening to my father's disappointment filter up through the floorboards, I made a decision that would change everything. I was tired of being ashamed of work that kept the country safe. I was tired of letting their narrow definition of success make me feel small. And I was especially tired of hiding the most important parts of myself from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The commendation ceremony was next week. For the first time in 8 years, I was going to invite my family to see who I really was. I had no idea that decision would lead to the most shocking moment of my life, when the director of Central Intelligence would speak my code name aloud, and my father would finally understand that his disappointment had been protecting his freedom all along. But that revelation was still 7 days away. First, I had to survive another family dinner where I pretended to be ordinary. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The family dinner that night felt like a greatest hits album of my father's disappointment. As I sat at the polished mahogany table in my childhood home, picking at my mother's famous pot roast, the familiar symphony of criticism began. "You know, the Henderson's daughter just made partner at Morrison & Associates," my father said, cutting his meat with surgical precision. "Youngest woman partner in the firm's history. Now that's what I call making something of yourself." My mother, Grace, shot him a warning look across the table. "Richard, please, Elena's doing fine." "Fine?" He set down his fork with a clink that seemed to echo through the dining room. "Grace, she's 32 years old. When I was her age, I was building a law practice, providing for a family, making a name for myself in this community. What has she accomplished? Computer work that pays barely enough to afford that tiny apartment downtown?" If only he knew that my computer work had just prevented a coordinated cyber attack that would have crippled the eastern seaboard's power grid. If only he knew that 3 months ago, I'd spent 72 hours straight tracking down a terrorist cell's financial network, leading to arrests in 6 countries. If only he knew that the tiny apartment was deliberately modest because attracting attention was the last thing someone in my position should do. But this wasn't new. This was the pattern that had defined our relationship for over a decade. I remember the exact moment when my father's pride in me died. I was 24, fresh out of MIT with my doctorate, and I'd just been approached by a CIA recruiter. The offer was incredible: challenging work, excellent benefits, the chance to serve my country at the highest levels. But when I tried to explain it to my family, all they heard was government job and can't discuss the details. "You're throwing away your potential," my father had said that day, standing in this very dining room. "With your intelligence, your education, you could work for any tech company in Silicon Valley. You could be making 6 figures, maybe 7. Instead, you want to be a bureaucrat?" What he didn't understand was that I'd already turned down offers from Google, Apple, and Microsoft. The CIA recruiter had shown me work that mattered on a scale those companies couldn't match. While Silicon Valley was building better advertising algorithms, I would be building digital shields against foreign adversaries. While they were optimizing user engagement, I would be saving lives. But I couldn't tell him any of that. So I watched his respect for me crumble as he convinced himself I'd chosen mediocrity. The disappointment hadn't stopped there. Every family gathering became another opportunity for him to highlight my shortcomings. When my brother Jake got married, my father's toast was about one child who understood what success really meant. When Jake bought his house in the prestigious Oakmont district, my father made sure to mention it was 3 times the size of my apartment. When Jake's first child was born, my father proudly told anyone who would listen about his successful son, the attorney, and his other daughter who works with computers. The pattern extended beyond career disappointment. My father had specific ideas about what a successful daughter looked like, and I failed on every metric. I wasn't married. You're not getting any younger, Elena. I didn't have children. When are you going to give us grandchildren? I didn't participate in high society charity events. The women in this family have always been community leaders. What he couldn't see was that I was serving the community in ways he couldn't imagine. While other women my age were organizing charity galas, I was organizing digital operations that protected millions of Americans from cyber warfare. While they were raising money for local causes, I was helping raise the nation's defenses against foreign threats. The most painful moment had come 2 years ago at Jake's promotion party. I'd just returned from a classified mission in Eastern Europe. 3 weeks of infiltrating a Russian cybercrime syndicate that had been targeting American financial institutions. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and still processing the fact that I'd helped prevent what could have been a complete collapse of several major banks. But when I walked into that party, my father introduced me to his colleagues the same way he always did. "This is my daughter Elena. She does something with computers. Jake here is the real success story, just made senior associate at his firm." I'd stood there in my modest dress, smiling politely, while these men in expensive suits looked at me with the kind of polite disinterest reserved for disappointing relatives. Meanwhile, I was carrying a phone that could connect me directly to the National Security Council. I had information in my head that could influence international policy. I'd just spent 3 weeks operating under deep cover in one of the most dangerous intelligence missions of the year. But to them, I was just the daughter who failed to live up to her potential.
The irony was suffocating. My father prized reputation, prestige, and public recognition above all else. He wanted children he could brag about at the country club, professionals whose accomplishments he could display like trophies. What he got instead was a daughter whose greatest achievements were invisible, whose most important work would never appear in any newspaper, whose true value to society was something he was legally prohibited from knowing. I'd tried to hint at the importance of my work over the years. "What I do is more significant than you might think," I'd said once. His response was a patronizing smile and, "I'm sure it feels important to you, sweetheart." Another time, when he was particularly critical about my lack of public recognition, I'd said, "Some of the most important work happens behind the scenes." He laughed and replied, "Elena, there's a difference between important work and work that doesn't pay well. You'll understand when you're older." When I'm older. As if 8 years of protecting national security was some kind of phase I'd grow out of. The pattern was so deeply entrenched that I'd almost given up trying to bridge the gap. Almost resigned myself to being the family disappointment forever. My mother tried to play peacekeeper, but even she didn't fully understand. She was proud of me in a quiet way, but she also worried that my father might be right about my choices limiting my future. Sitting at that dinner table, listening to another recitation of my failures, I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep living this double life where I was simultaneously one of the most trusted intelligence analysts in the country and the daughter who couldn't get her life together. The disconnect was becoming unbearable. I was tired of hiding, tired of pretending my work was ordinary when it was extraordinary, tired of letting my father's narrow definition of success diminish my sense of self-worth. That's when I decided to invite them to the commendation ceremony. For the first time in 8 years, I was going to let them see who I really was. The conversation I'd been avoiding for 8 years finally erupted 3 days later. I'd spent those days wrestling with my decision, knowing that once I crossed this line, there would be no going back. The commendation ceremony was in 4 days, and I still hadn't told my family about it. I called my father Tuesday evening, my hands slightly trembling as I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that familiar tone of polite resignation he used when talking to me. "Elena, what's this about? Your mother said you wanted to discuss something important." I took a deep breath, standing in my apartment kitchen, staring out at the city lights of Riverside. "Dad, I want you and Mom to come to an event with me this Friday. It's a work thing, a ceremony." There was a pause, and I could almost hear him calculating whether this was worth his time. "What kind of ceremonies? Some sort of office party?" "It's a commendation ceremony. I'm being recognized for my work." I kept my voice steady, not revealing how much this moment meant to me. "Recognized for what exactly?" His tone sharpened with skepticism. "Elena, I don't understand why you're being so mysterious about your job. If you're finally getting a promotion or something significant, just say so." This was the moment I'd been dreading. How do you explain 8 years of lies without destroying everything? "Dad, my work is more complex than I've been able to tell you. I work for the federal government in a capacity that requires security clearance." "Security clearance," he laughed, and the sound cut through me like glass. "Elena, what are you talking about? You're a computer programmer. What could possibly require security clearance about updating software or whatever it is you do?" "It's not software development, Dad. I work in intelligence." The silence that followed was deafening. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, analytical, the same tone he used in court when dismantling a witness's credibility. "Intelligence? Elena, are you having some kind of breakdown? Are you claiming you're some sort of spy now? Is this what happens when someone spends too much time alone with computers? You start creating fantasy careers?" The dismissal hit harder than I had expected. I'd prepared for disbelief, but not for him to question my mental health. "I'm not having a breakdown, Dad. I'm trying to tell you the truth about what I do for a living." "The truth?" His voice rose, taking on the prosecutorial edge I remembered from childhood arguments. "The truth is that you've been living in a fantasy world for 8 years. The truth is that you're 32 years old and you're making up stories about being a government agent because you're embarrassed about your actual job." "I'm not making anything up. I work for the Central Intelligence Agency. I have top secret clearance. The ceremony on Friday is at the federal building downtown, and the director of Central Intelligence will be there to personally commend my work." "Elena, stop. Just stop." His voice cracked with a mixture of anger and what sounded like genuine concern. "Do you hear yourself? Do you understand how this sounds? My daughter, who can barely afford to live in a decent neighborhood, is claiming she works for the CIA? My daughter, who has never shown any interest in politics or government, is supposedly some kind of intelligence analyst?" Each word felt like a physical blow. I'd expected disbelief, but not for him to question my mental health.
"Dad, please, I know this is hard to believe, but I'm telling you the truth. The reason I can't afford a bigger apartment isn't because I don't make enough money. It's because people in my position need to maintain a low profile. The reason I've never been able to discuss my work isn't because it's unimportant. It's because it's classified."
"Classified," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Elena, let me explain something to you about the real world. People who work for the CIA don't invite their families to public ceremonies. Intelligence operatives don't get publicly commended by directors. Everything you're describing is exactly what someone who watched too many movies would imagine government work to be like." His certainty was staggering. Here was a man who'd built his career on evidence and logical reasoning, and he was dismissing the truth because it didn't fit his preconceived notions about my life. "I can't give you details about operational work," I said, my voice becoming strained. "But the ceremony is real. The commendation is real. My position is real. I'm asking you to trust me enough to attend one event." "Trust you?" The words came out like an accusation.
Elena, you're asking me to believe that for 8 years you've been lying to your family about having one of the most important jobs in government? You're asking me to believe that while I've been worried about your future, you've actually been saving the country? Do you understand how insane that sounds? I wasn't lying about having the job. I was lying about what the job was. There's a difference. No, there isn't. His voice was final, decisive. A lie is a lie, Elena, and this particular lie tells me everything I need to know about where your head has been for the past 8 years. You've been so ashamed of your actual work that you've created this elaborate fantasy to make yourself feel important. The accusation hit like a physical slap. In his mind, I was so pathetic that I'd invented an entire false identity to cope with my failures. The irony was suffocating. I was trying to reveal the truth, and he was convinced I was diving deeper into delusion. Dad, I'm begging you. Come to the ceremony. See for yourself. Let me prove that what I'm telling you is real. Elena, I'm not going to enable this fantasy. I'm not going to sit in some government building and watch you embarrass yourself and our family because you've convinced yourself you're someone you're not. What you need is professional help, not validation for these delusions. They're not delusions. The words exploded out of me. 8 years of frustration finally breaking through. I know this is hard to accept, but I am exactly who I'm telling you I am. I've spent 8 years protecting this country from cyber attacks, terrorist threats, and foreign espionage. I've prevented attacks that would have killed thousands of people. I've infiltrated criminal organizations and disrupted terrorist networks. My work has saved lives, Dad. American lives. The silence stretched so long, I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost sad. Elena, listening to you right now, it breaks my heart. I don't know what happened to the brilliant daughter I raised, but this person who's making up stories about being a secret agent, this isn't you. This is someone who's lost touch with reality. The person you raised is exactly who I am. The only difference is that I used my intelligence for something you can't understand instead of something you could brag about. I'm not continuing this conversation, he said firmly. When you're ready to be honest about your life, when you're ready to get the help you clearly need, call me. Until then, I won't be a part of whatever this is. The line went dead, leaving me standing in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone that sounded like the death knell of our relationship. I'd finally told him the truth, and he'd decided I was insane. I didn't sleep that night. By 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, I was sitting in Cafe Luna, a small coffee shop near the Federal Building that had become my unofficial office for meetings that couldn't happen at Langley. The owner, Mrs. Chen, had grown accustomed to my irregular hours and always had my usual ready. Black coffee, no sugar, and a blueberry muffin I rarely touched. I was staring at my phone, debating whether to call in sick, when someone slid into the booth across from me. I looked up to find Agent Victoria Hayes, my handler and the closest thing I had to a friend in this business. "You look like hell, Thorne," she signaled Mrs. Chen for coffee. Victoria was one of those people who could make a government-issued blazer look like haute couture. She'd been with the agency for 15 years, worked her way up from field operations to management, and had the rare ability to navigate both the political side of intelligence work and the operational side with equal skill. "Thanks for the pep talk," I muttered, taking a sip of coffee that had gone cold while I'd been lost in thought. Victoria studied my face with the analytical gaze that made her so effective in her job. "This isn't about Operation Blackwater, is it? You've been weird since we scheduled the commendation ceremony. Most people would be thrilled about getting personal recognition from the director." I let out a bitter laugh. "Most people's fathers think they're delusional." "Ah," Victoria leaned back, understanding immediately. "You told your family." "I tried. My father thinks I've had a complete break from reality. He's convinced I'm making up stories about working for the CIA because I'm ashamed of my actual job." Victoria's eyebrows shot up. "He thinks you're lying about being a spy? That's actually kind of funny."
"Hilarious," I said dryly. "My father, the man who raised me to value truth above all else, is convinced I'm either a pathological liar or mentally ill because I finally told him the truth about my career."
Elena, what did you expect? You've been maintaining a cover story for 8 years. Of course he's going to have trouble accepting that everything he thought he knew about your life was wrong. I expected skepticism. I expected questions. I didn't expect him to diagnose me with a psychological disorder and refuse to even consider that I might be telling the truth. Victoria sipped her coffee, her expression thoughtful. You know, when I started with the agency, I made the mistake of trying to explain my work to my college roommate. She listened to me describe a fairly routine surveillance operation, nodded along, and then asked if I'd considered therapy for my vivid imagination. How did you handle it? I stopped trying to make people understand who I really was. It was easier to let them think I was boring than to convince them I was important. Victoria's voice carried a note of regret. But that was 15 years ago, and I was 25 and single. You're dealing with family. That's different. I pushed my untouched muffin around the plate. The worst part is that he's not entirely wrong about one thing. I have been living a lie for 8 years. Just not the lie he thinks. No, Elena, you've been protecting classified information for 8 years. There's a difference between lying and maintaining operational security. Is there? Because right now it feels like I've been so deep undercover in my own life that I don't know how to surface without destroying everything. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to the tone she used during mission briefings. Let me tell you something about your father's reaction. It's actually evidence that you've been doing your job correctly. The fact that a successful attorney, someone trained to evaluate evidence and detect deception, completely believes your cover story means you've maintained operational security perfectly. That doesn't make me feel better. It should. Do you know how many operatives struggle with maintaining cover with their families? Most people either get sloppy and reveal too much, or they get distant and damage relationships. You've managed to stay close to your family while keeping them completely unaware of your real work. That takes skill. I looked up at Victoria, seeing something in her expression I hadn't noticed before. You've been through this. Not exactly, but close enough. My sister spent 5 years thinking I was a mid-level accountant at the Treasury Department. When I finally got clearance to read her in on some basic details about my work, she accused me of making up stories to seem more interesting at family reunions. How did you convince her? I didn't. She came around on her own when she started dating a guy who worked for the NSA. He took one look at my security protocols and told her, "Your sister's not an accountant." The conversation was helping, but I still felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. Victoria, what if I invite them to the ceremony and it makes everything worse? What if my father sees the whole thing and still thinks it's some elaborate performance? Then you'll know where you stand with him. Elena, you can't keep living in limbo. Either your family accepts who you really are, or they don't. But you deserve to know which it is. She was right, but that didn't make the prospect any less terrifying. The ceremony is in 2 days. I haven't even told my mother what happened with my father. For all I know, he's already convinced her that I'm having a breakdown. Have you considered that your mother might surprise you? Mothers have a way of knowing their children better than fathers sometimes do. I thought about my mother, Grace, who had always been the emotional center of our family. She was the one who remembered birthdays, who sensed when something was wrong, who tried to mediate between my father's expectations and my reality. Maybe Victoria was right. There's something else, Victoria said, pulling out her phone. I talked to Director Walsh yesterday about your situation. She wanted me to give you this. She showed me a text message. Agent Nightingale has been one of our most valuable assets for 8 years. Her work on Operation Blackwater alone saved approximately 50,000 civilian lives and prevented $2.3 billion in infrastructure damage. If her family needs official confirmation of her service record, I'm prepared to provide it personally. I stared at the message, feeling a strange mix of pride and sadness. Here was official recognition of my value, quantified in lives saved and damage prevented, but it was also evidence of how far apart my professional life and personal life had become.
Elena, you've been carrying this burden alone for too long. You've been protecting your family from the truth because you thought it would hurt them. But what's really been hurting them is the distance that secrecy creates. Victoria was right. I'd been so focused on protecting my cover that I'd forgotten what I was supposed to be protecting. My relationships with my family had suffered because I couldn't share the most important parts of my life with them. So what do? You call your mother, you explain the situation honestly, you invite them both to the ceremony, and you let the chips fall where they may. And if my father refuses to come, if he decides this is all too crazy and cuts me off completely, Victoria's expression softened, then you'll know that your father's love was conditional on you being someone other than who you are, and that's information worth having, even if it hurts. She was right. I had spent 8 years trying to be the daughter my father wanted, while secretly being the agent my country needed. It was time to find out if he could love both versions of me, or if he could only love the lie. The call to my mother was supposed to be simple. Just explain the ceremony, invite her to attend, and hope she could convince my father to reconsider. But as I sat in my apartment Wednesday evening, phone in hand, I realized this conversation was going to be far more complicated than I'd anticipated. Elena, honey, your father told me about your phone call yesterday. My mother's voice was gentle but concerned, the tone she'd used when I was sick as a child. He's very worried about you. Mom, I need you to listen to me carefully. Everything I told Dad yesterday was true. I work for the Central Intelligence Agency. I have for 8 years. The ceremony on Friday is real, and I'm being personally commended by the director for my work on a classified operation. There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. Elena, sweetheart, I know you've always been creative, but this seems... Mom, please, just listen. Do you remember when I graduated from MIT, when I told you I was interviewing for government positions but couldn't discuss the details? Yes, but you said it was some kind of research position. It was research. Intelligence research. Mom, I'm a senior cyber intelligence analyst. My code name is Agent Nightingale. I work on cyber terrorism, foreign espionage, and digital warfare. The reason I've never been able to talk about my work isn't because it's unimportant, it's because it's classified at the highest levels. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, my mother's voice changed. Elena, there's something I need to tell you, something I probably should have mentioned years ago. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? About 3 years ago, I ran into Professor Martinez at the grocery store. You remember him from MIT. He asked how you were doing, and when I mentioned you were working in computer programming, he looked confused. He said he'd always expected you to end up in intelligence or defense work, given your specialization in cryptography and your senior thesis on cyber warfare. I felt the blood drain from my face. What did you tell him? I told him you were doing programming work for the government, and he nodded like that made sense. But Elena, I always wondered why you downplayed your education so much. You have a doctorate in computer science with a focus on cryptography, but you always made it sound like you were doing basic programming. Mom, why didn't you ever ask me about this? I did once. You said you couldn't discuss your work in detail because of confidentiality agreements. I assumed it was some kind of corporate thing, but her voice trailed off. Elena, are you telling me that for 8 years, when I've been telling people you work in computer programming, you've actually been working for the CIA? Yes. The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost reverent. Oh my God! Elena, are you telling me my daughter is a spy? I'm an intelligence analyst, not a field operative, but yes, essentially, yes. Jesus Christ! I've never heard my mother swear before. Elena, do you understand what this means? All those times your father criticized your career? All those family dinners where he compared you to Jake? All those comments about you not living up to your potential? I know, Mom, I know. No, you don't know. Elena, this is bigger than just your father being wrong about your job. This changes everything about how our family has functioned for the past 8 years. I wasn't sure what she meant, but her tone was making me nervous. How so? Elena, do you remember your cousin Sarah's wedding 3 years ago when your father introduced you to his business partners as my daughter who does computer work? One of those men was Judge Harrison. Do you know who Judge Harrison is? No, should I?
He sits on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. He's one of the judges who approves warrants for intelligence operations. Elena, when your father introduced you as a computer programmer, Judge Harrison looked relieved. Relieved? Why would he look relieved? I didn't understand it at the time, but now, Elena, I think he was relieved that Richard Thorne's daughter wasn't involved in intelligence work. Your father has been representing some very wealthy clients in recent years, clients with international business interests. Some of those interests might not want to be associated with families connected to the intelligence community. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Mom, are you saying Dad's clients might have had a problem with me working for the CIA? I don't know, but I'm starting to understand why your father has been so invested in believing you're just a computer programmer. Elena, what if he suspected the truth all along? What if his reaction yesterday wasn't disbelief? What if it was fear? My mind raced through the past 8 years looking for signs I might have missed. My father's insistence that I was wasting my potential, his strange relief whenever I downplayed my work, his anger when I mentioned security clearances or government work, his refusal to attend any work-related events I'd been allowed to invite family to. Mom, who are these clients? What kind of international business?
I don't know all the details, but I know he's been working with some import-export companies, some investment firms with foreign partners. Elena, your father has always been careful about conflicts of interest. What if he's been keeping your career status vague because he was worried about how it might affect his practice? The conversation was taking a turn I hadn't anticipated. What had started as a simple revelation about my career was becoming something much more complex. Mom, are you suggesting that Dad has known what I do for a living and has been deliberately covering it up? I'm not sure what I'm suggesting, but Elena, your father is a smart man. He spent 30 years evaluating evidence and reading people. The idea that he could be completely fooled by a cover story for 8 years? It doesn't match what I know about his abilities. She was right. My father was one of the sharpest people I knew. His ability to detect inconsistencies and read between the lines was legendary in his profession. The idea that he'd been completely oblivious to the nature of my work was starting to seem less plausible. There's something else, my mother continued. About 6 months ago, your father got a new client, a man named Viktor Petrov, some kind of businessman with interests in Eastern Europe. After their first meeting, your father came home and asked me, very specifically, whether you'd ever mentioned working with international affairs or foreign governments. My hands were shaking now. Viktor Petrov. The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. What did you tell him? I told him no, that you'd always said you just did computer programming. He seemed relieved, but also worried. Elena, what if this Petrov person is someone your agency is interested in? The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they were forming was terrifying. My father hadn't just been disappointed in my career choices. He had been actively invested in maintaining my cover story, but not to protect my operational security, to protect his own business interests. Mom, I need you to tell me everything you remember about these clients. Names, businesses, anything Dad might have mentioned. Elena, you're scaring me. Are you saying your father might be involved with people who might be dangerous? I don't know yet, but Mom, if Dad has been representing clients who have conflicts with U.S. intelligence interests, and if he's known all along that I work for the CIA, then his reaction yesterday wasn't about my mental health. It was about protecting his business. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was small, frightened. Elena, what does this mean for our family? I didn't have an answer for her, but I was starting to understand that the ceremony on Friday wasn't just about getting recognition for my work. It was about forcing a confrontation that had been 8 years in the making, a confrontation that might reveal my father hadn't just been a disappointed parent, but something much worse. I hung up with my mother and immediately called Victoria. It was nearly 10 p.m., but in our line of work, late-night calls weren't unusual. She answered on the first ring. Elena, what's wrong? I need to run some names through the database. Unofficial search, just to satisfy my own curiosity. There was a pause. Elena, please tell me you're not conducting unauthorized surveillance on your family. Not surveillance, research. Elena, I think my father might have known about my job all along, and I think he might have clients who wouldn't want to be associated with a CIA analyst's family. Another pause, longer this time. I'll meet you at the office in 20 minutes. And Elena, don't do anything stupid until I get there. The federal building was nearly empty at this hour, just a few security guards and the occasional analyst working late on time-sensitive intelligence. Victoria's badge got us through the security checkpoints and up to the restricted floors where the real work happened. All right, Victoria said, settling behind her computer terminal. What names are we looking for? Viktor Petrov. He's apparently a new client of my father's, some kind of businessman with Eastern European interests. My mother said Dad specifically asked about my work after meeting with him. Victoria's fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing databases that didn't officially exist. Within minutes, she had a file pulled up that made both of us go silent. Elena, your father's new client isn't just any businessman. Viktor Petrov is a suspected money launderer with ties to the Volkov crime family. He's been on our watch list for 3 years. My stomach dropped. What kind of ties? Financial services, primarily. He runs what appears to be a legitimate import-export business, but we believe it's a front for moving money out of Russia for oligarchs trying to avoid sanctions. The problem is, he's been very careful about staying within legal boundaries. Everything he does is technically legitimate. I stared at the screen, reading through the intelligence summary. Petrov was sophisticated, educated, and dangerous in the way that only came from operating in the gray areas between legal and illegal for decades. Victoria, what would happen if someone like Petrov discovered that his American attorney's daughter worked for the CIA? Depends on what he's really up to. If he's just laundering money, he'd probably just find a new attorney. But if he's involved in active intelligence operations against the U.S., Victoria's voice trailed off as she pulled up another file. Elena, there's something else. Petrov's business partner is Dmitry Kozlov. The name hit me like ice water. Kozlov? The same Kozlov from Operation Blackwater? The very same. Elena, Dmitry Kozlov was the financial architect behind the cyber attack you just prevented. He was the one funneling money to the terrorist cells that were planning to bring down the power grid.
The room seemed to spin around me. Operation Blackwater had been 6 months of my life, 6 months of tracking digital money trails and encrypted communications. I'd helped identify the financial network that was funding one of the most sophisticated cyber terrorism plots in U.S. history. And now I was discovering that one of the key players in that network was doing business with my father. Victoria, this can't be a coincidence. Kozlov's business partner just happens to hire my father as his attorney right after we shut down Kozlov's operation? No, it's not a coincidence. Elena, I think your father was targeted specifically because of your position. Victoria pulled up more files, her expression growing more concerned with each document. Look at this. Petrov's company started doing business in the United States 8 months ago. That's 2 months before Operation Blackwater was launched. His first major business transaction was establishing a legal relationship with Thorne and Associates. So Petrov has been planning this since before we even knew Kozlov existed. It gets worse. Look at the timeline of your father's other new clients. Victoria's screen filled with names and dates. In the past year, your father has acquired 6 new clients with international business interests. 3 of them are on various government watch lists. 2 others have been flagged by FinCEN for suspicious financial transactions. I felt sick. My father, the man who'd raised me to believe in justice and integrity, had somehow become the go-to attorney for people who operated in the shadows of international finance. Victoria, could this be why he reacted so strongly when I told him about my job? Not because he didn't believe me, but because he knew it was true and it threatened his business. More than his business, Elena. If Petrov discovers that Richard Thorne's daughter was the analyst who helped bring down his partner's operation, your father could be in real danger. These aren't people who handle betrayal lightly. I thought back to my father's reaction on the phone, the way he dismissed my claims as delusion rather than asking for proof. At the time, I'd thought he was being stubborn and narrow-minded. Now I was wondering if he'd been terrified. There's something else we need to check, I said, a horrible thought occurring to me. Victoria, can you pull up my personnel file, specifically my security clearance background investigation? Elena, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that if someone wanted to place an asset close to a CIA analyst, they might start by getting close to her family. Victoria's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Elena, you're talking about the possibility that your father was recruited by foreign intelligence. That's a very serious accusation. I'm not accusing him of anything yet. I'm just trying to understand how all these pieces fit together. She pulled up my security file, the comprehensive background investigation that had been conducted when I joined the agency. Elena, your father was interviewed as part of your clearance process, standard procedure for family members of intelligence personnel. I know. I remember him being annoyed about it. He said it was invasive and unnecessary. According to this report, the investigators noted that your father was cooperative but expressed concerns about your daughter's career choice. They specifically noted that he seemed uncomfortable with the security implications of your work. Victoria scrubbed through the report, her expression growing more troubled with each document. Look at this. The investigators recommended periodic monitoring of your family's financial activities as a routine security precaution. But there's a note here that the monitoring was discontinued after 6 months because your father filed a complaint about harassment. He had the monitoring stopped? Not just stopped, he threatened legal action against the agency for what he called unwarranted surveillance of American citizens. The complaint was upheld and the monitoring was permanently discontinued. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture I didn't want to see. My father hadn't just been unaware of my work. He'd been actively working to keep the agency from monitoring his activities. And now, 3 years later, he was representing clients with direct ties to the operations I was working to disrupt. Victoria, what if my father's been working for them all along? What if the reason he was so upset about my career wasn't disappointment, but fear that I'd discover what he was really doing? Elena, that's a very serious allegation. If you're right, it means your father isn't just a lawyer who made some questionable client choices. It means he's been operating as a foreign asset while his daughter worked for the CIA. That thought made me physically ill, but I couldn't ignore the evidence. We need to know more about his other clients. We need to understand what services he's been providing and how much he knows about what they're really doing. Victoria was already pulling up more files, her expression grim. Elena, if your father is what we think he might be, then Friday's ceremony isn't just about recognizing your work. It's about exposing a potential security breach that's been operating right under our noses for years. And if I'm wrong, if he's just a lawyer who got in over his head with dangerous clients, then we'll know that too. But Elena, either way, your family situation just became a matter of national security. I didn't go home that night. After what Victoria and I had discovered, my apartment suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Instead, I stayed at the Safe House facility in Arlington, a nondescript building that housed intelligence personnel during sensitive operations. It was Thursday morning now, less than 24 hours before the ceremony, and everything in my life had been turned upside down. Victoria found me in the secure communications room at 6 a.m., staring at multiple computer screens displaying surveillance footage, financial records, and communication intercepts. I'd been awake all night using every resource at my disposal to map out the full extent of my father's connections.
Elena, you look terrible. Have you slept at all? Look at this, I said, pointing to the main screen. I've been tracking my father's financial records for the past 2 years. Victoria, he's been receiving payments that don't match his normal client billing patterns. She pulled up a chair beside me, studying the data I'd compiled. What kind of payments? Consulting fees. Large ones, from shell companies that trace back to Petrov's network. But here's the thing. The payments started 18 months ago, long before Petrov officially became his client. Victoria's expression darkened as she reviewed the financial analysis. Elena, this suggests that your father was being compensated for information long before any official attorney-client relationship existed. It gets worse. I cross-referenced the timing of these payments with my operational schedule. Every major payment corresponds to either the beginning or conclusion of a significant intelligence operation I was involved in. I pulled up a timeline that made my stomach churn. Payment in March 2023, right after I'd been briefed on the preliminary intelligence that would become Operation Blackwater. Another payment in August 2023, just as we'd identified the key players in the cyber terrorism network. A third payment in December 2023, immediately following the successful conclusion of the operation. Victoria, my father wasn't just representing these people, he was feeding them information about my work. Elena, we need to report this immediately. If your father has been compromising ongoing operations? Wait, there's more I need to show you first. I pulled up another screen displaying phone records. I hacked into my father's communication logs. Look at this pattern. The data showed a clear correlation between my father's encrypted phone calls to unknown numbers and changes in the behavior patterns of our surveillance targets. Every time my father made one of these calls, the people we were tracking would suddenly alter their communication methods, change their travel plans, or modify their operational security. My father has been actively sabotaging my operations. He's been warning these people every time we got close. Victoria stood up abruptly, pacing behind my chair. Elena, this is treason. Your father isn't just a lawyer who got in over his head. He's been operating as a foreign asset for over a year. Which means every operation I've worked on for the past 18 months has been compromised. Every target we've missed, every lead that went cold, every attack we couldn't prevent. The weight of it hit me like a physical blow. Victoria, how many people died because my father was selling information? We don't know yet, but Elena, we need to contain the situation immediately. Your father can't know that we've discovered his activities. I was already moving, pulling up the secure communication protocols. I'm implementing immediate security measures. First, I need to change all my access codes and communication channels. If my father has been monitoring my work, he might have found ways to access my systems. Elena, that's standard protocol, but there's something else we need to consider. Your mother. If your father is compromised, she could be in danger too, either as collateral damage or because she knows something that could expose his activities. The thought of my mother being caught in the middle of this made my chest tight. I need to warn her, but I can't tell her the truth about what we've discovered. Why not? Because if my father is monitoring her communications, or if she accidentally reveals that she knows something, it could get her killed. I pulled up a new communication protocol, one that would allow me to contact my mother through encrypted channels without leaving a trail that could be traced back to agency systems. I'm going to tell her there's a security concern related to the ceremony and that she should stay away from the house until after it's over. Elena, she's going to want explanations. Then I'll give her partial truths. I'll tell her that some of my father's clients have raised security concerns and that it's safer for her to maintain distance until we can assess the threat level. Victoria nodded slowly. That might work, but what about your father? How do we handle him?
I stared at the screens full of evidence that my father had been betraying everything I dedicated my life to protecting. We let him think everything is normal. I'll contact him, tell him the ceremony is still happening, and see if he takes the date. And if he shows up? Then we'll have him under surveillance when he makes contact with Petrov's network. We'll finally have the evidence we need to prove that Richard Thorne has been selling out his own daughter and his own country. Victoria looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Elena, are you sure you're ready for this? Finding out that your father is a traitor is different from proving it in a way that will hold up in court. I thought about the past 18 months of failed operations, missed targets, and attacks we couldn't prevent. I thought about the people who might have died because my father valued money more than American lives. I thought about the betrayal that went deeper than any family conflict I'd ever imagined. Victoria, for 8 years I've been protecting this country from foreign threats. It turns out one of those threats has been living in my childhood home and calling me a disappointment for protecting the very people he's been betraying. I turned back to the computer, beginning to implement the security protocols that would protect both my operational integrity and my life. Tomorrow's ceremony isn't just about recognition anymore. It's about ending a security breach that's been operating under our noses for over a year. And yes, I'm ready for that. Thursday afternoon brought a phone call that changed everything. I was in the secure facility reviewing surveillance protocols when my encrypted phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered it. Elena Thorne? The voice was accented, cultured, unmistakably Russian. Who is this? My name is Viktor Petrov. I believe you know who I am. My blood ran cold. I immediately signaled to Victoria, who began tracing the call while I kept Petrov talking. I know you're one of my father's clients. Among other things, yes. I'm calling because there seems to be some confusion about tomorrow's ceremony. Your father has informed me that you're receiving recognition from the Central Intelligence Agency for your work on something called Operation Blackwater. The fact that he knew the operations codename told me everything I needed to know. My father hadn't just been selling general information, he'd been providing specific operational details. I'm not sure what my father told you, but I don't discuss my work with anyone outside my agency. Haha, Petrov laughed, a sound like ice cracking. Elena, let me be very clear about something. Your work on Operation Blackwater cost my organization a great deal of money and several valuable associates. Your analysis led to the arrest of people I consider family. If your family consists of cyber terrorists, then I'm proud of my work. Proud, he repeated the word slowly. How interesting. Tell me, Elena, are you proud of what your work has cost your own family? I felt the ground shift beneath me. What are you talking about? Your father owes my organization a considerable debt. The information he's provided over the past year and a half has been valuable, but not valuable enough to compensate for the losses we suffered from Operation Blackwater. Since you were the architect of our misfortune, we feel it's appropriate that you help settle his account. The conversation was taking a turn I hadn't anticipated. You're threatening me. I'm offering you an opportunity. Tomorrow's ceremony represents a problem for us. Having the architect of Operation Blackwater publicly recognized creates complications for our ongoing business relationships. We'd prefer if that recognition were postponed indefinitely. And if I refuse, then your father will face consequences for his inability to provide adequate compensation for our losses. Elena, your father borrowed against future earnings when he began providing us information. Unfortunately, his recent performance has been inadequate. I realized what was happening. My father hadn't just been selling information for money, he'd been trapped in an escalating debt cycle with people who didn't accept bankruptcy as an excuse for non-payment. How much does he owe you? Currently, approximately $2 million, plus interest, which compounds daily. The number was staggering. That's impossible. My father doesn't have access to that kind of money. Precisely the problem, which is why we've developed an alternate payment plan. You disappear tomorrow's ceremony. You also provide us with intelligence on ongoing CIA operations targeting Russian business interests. In exchange, your father's debt is forgiven, and your family remains safe. And if I don't agree to become a traitor? Elena, your father is already a traitor. The only question is whether his daughter chooses to save his life or let pride lead to his death. I looked at Victoria, who was frantically typing on her computer while listening to our conversation through the surveillance equipment. She showed me a screen indicating they'd traced the call to a location in downtown Washington, less than 5 miles from where I was sitting. I need to think about this. You have until 6 p.m. today. I'll call you back for your answer. And Elena, don't consider involving your agency colleagues in this decision. We have people watching the federal building. We know you're there right now, and we know who you've been talking to. Any attempt to set a trap will result in immediate consequences for your father. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone while Victoria rapidly coordinated tracking efforts with other agents. Elena, they traced our location.
That means they've been conducting surveillance on CIA facilities, which means this is bigger than just my father's debt. Victoria, they're not just threatening my family, they're demonstrating that they have intelligence capabilities operating on American soil.
Within minutes, Victoria had pulled up surveillance footage from around the federal building. Elena, look at this. We've identified at least 3 individuals who've been maintaining observation positions around the building for the past week. The images showed professionals, not amateurs. These weren't street criminals or basic enforcers. They were trained operatives conducting sophisticated surveillance operations against U.S. intelligence facilities. Elena, we need to report this to Director Walsh immediately. This isn't just about my father anymore. This is about a foreign intelligence operation that's been monitoring CIA activities. Already on it. But Elena, there's something else. The timing of this call isn't coincidental. They contacted you after you discovered your father's activities, but before you could implement full security protocols for tomorrow's ceremony. I realized what she was saying. They know we know. My father must have told them that the family conversation didn't go well, and they put together that I might investigate further. Which means they're accelerating their timeline. Elena, they're not just asking you to skip the ceremony, they're trying to prevent you from exposing their entire operation. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was a photograph of my mother leaving her office building taken from across the street. The message below was simple: 6 p.m. deadline stands. They have eyes on my mother. I showed Victoria the image. This isn't just a threat anymore. They're demonstrating active surveillance capabilities against my family. Victoria immediately began coordinating with the Protective Services Division. We're putting your mother under immediate protection, but Elena, we need to consider the possibility that this escalation is exactly what they want. What do you mean? Think about it. They're forcing us to reveal our security capabilities in order to protect your family. Every protective measure we implement gives them intelligence about our operational procedures. They're using your father's situation to conduct reconnaissance against the CIA. The strategy was sophisticated and terrifying. They weren't just threatening my family to control my behavior. They were using my family as leverage to gather intelligence about American security operations. Victoria, what if the real target isn't the ceremony at all? What if they're using the threat against the ceremony to force us to reveal our security protocols for protecting high-value intelligence assets? That's exactly what I'm thinking. Elena, your father's debt might be real, but this operation is about much more than money. They're conducting a live intelligence gathering operation against the CIA, using you and your family as the catalyst. I stared at the surveillance photos. The evidence of their capabilities, the sophistication of their approach, which means tomorrow's ceremony isn't just about recognition or even about exposing my father's activities. It's about whether we can protect American intelligence operations from a sophisticated foreign assault. And the clock is ticking. You have less than 3 hours to decide whether to cave to their demands or call their bluff. I looked at the evidence we'd gathered, the proof of my father's betrayal, the demonstration of their surveillance capabilities. Victoria, what if there's a third option? What if we don't just protect the ceremony or cancel it? What if we use it to take down their entire operation? Elena, that would mean using yourself and your family as bait in one of the most dangerous counterintelligence operations in recent memory. Then that's what we do. Because the alternative is letting foreign operatives dictate American intelligence policy through threats against our personnel. At 4:30 p.m., 90 minutes before Petrov's deadline, my secure phone rang with a call that would complicate everything. The caller ID showed a number I recognized from my father's contact list, one I'd seen repeatedly in the financial records I'd been analyzing. Elena, this is Marcus Webb. I need to meet with you immediately. I recognized the name from my research into my father's client network. Marcus Webb was supposedly a consultant who worked with several of my father's international clients, including Petrov. According to the financial records, he'd been receiving payments from the same shell companies that had been compensating my father. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Mr. Webb. We have everything to discuss. I'm in the lobby of your building right now. I'm coming up alone, and I'm coming up to save your life. I looked at Victoria, who was already pulling up Webb's file on her computer. She showed me the screen. Marcus Webb, 45, former CIA operative who'd left the agency under unclear circumstances 5 years ago. Since then, he'd been working as a private intelligence contractor with an ambiguous client list. Elena, you know that Petrov's 6 p.m. deadline isn't what you think it is. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him in one of the secure conference rooms. When Webb walked in, he looked like what he was, a former intelligence operative who'd spent too many years in the gray areas between legitimate work and something darker. His suit was expensive but worn, his demeanor confident but tired. Elena, before I say anything else, you need to know that I've been working undercover for the past 3 years. Everything I've done with Petrov's organization has been sanctioned by a joint task force operation that your agency wasn't read into. Victoria and I exchanged glances. If Webb was telling the truth, it meant there was an ongoing operation that we knew nothing about. If he was lying, it was an elaborate attempt to manipulate us. Prove it, Victoria said simply. Webb pulled out a phone and made a call. This is Agent Webb, authorization code Tango 7 Alpha. I need to speak with Deputy Director Harrison immediately. He handed the phone to Victoria. I watched her face change as she listened to whatever Harrison was telling her. When she hung up, her expression was grim.
He's telling the truth. There's been a joint CIA-FBI task force operation targeting Russian financial networks for the past 3 years. Webb has been working undercover to infiltrate Petrov's organization. I felt the ground shift beneath me again. So you've known about my father's involvement all along? Webb shook his head. That's where this gets complicated. We knew Petrov was recruiting American assets, but we didn't know the identity of his primary legal counsel until yesterday. Elena, your father wasn't on our radar because his activities were so well compartmentalized from Petrov's other operations. But you've been working with Petrov for 3 years. How could you not know about my father? Because Petrov is smarter than we gave him credit for. He's been running multiple operations simultaneously, keeping each cell isolated from the others. I was focused on his money laundering activities and his connections to the Volkov crime family. Your father's intelligence selling operation was run through a completely separate network. Victoria leaned forward. So when Elena discovered her father's activities yesterday, it was the first time anyone in U.S. intelligence knew about this particular compromise? Exactly. And Elena, that's why today's deadline isn't about your father's debt or about stopping tomorrow's ceremony. It's about something much bigger. Webb pulled out a tablet and showed us a complex diagram mapping Petrov's organizational structure. 3 days ago, our operation was supposed to conclude with the arrest of Petrov and his key associates. But yesterday, Petrov received information that led him to believe his organization had been infiltrated by American intelligence. I felt my stomach drop. Information from my father. Yes, when your father called Petrov yesterday after your conversation, he wasn't just reporting on your family situation. He was warning Petrov that his daughter worked for the CIA and had expressed concerns about his client relationships. The implications hit me like a physical blow. My father's warning compromised your entire operation. 3 years of work, Elena. 3 years of building relationships, gathering evidence, and mapping networks. All of it blown because your father panicked after your phone call. Victoria was studying the organizational chart. So, what's Petrov's real agenda with the 6 p.m. deadline? He's using Elena's situation as cover to evacuate his key personnel and assets. While we're focused on protecting her and preparing for tomorrow's ceremony, he's systematically dismantling his entire American operation. I stared at Webb, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling me. So, my father didn't just betray my operations, he destroyed yours too. Elena, it's worse than that. Petrov knows that I'm CIA now. He's known since yesterday. The only reason I'm still alive is because he needs me for one final operation. What operation? Well's expression darkened. He wants me to eliminate the intelligence analyst who compromised his partner's cyberterrorism network. He wants me to kill you, Elena, tonight, before tomorrow's ceremony, in a way that looks like an accident or suicide. The room went silent. Victoria's hand moved instinctively toward her weapon, but Webb raised his hands peacefully. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. But Elena, you need to understand what we're dealing with. Petrov isn't just threatening your family to control your behavior. He's planning to eliminate you entirely, and he's using a compromised CIA operative to do it. Why are you telling us this instead of just following through with his plan? Because 3 years undercover in that organization has shown me exactly what happens to countries when people like Petrov operate without consequences. Elena, your work on Operation Blackwater didn't just prevent a cyber attack. It exposed a network that was planning to systematically cripple American infrastructure for the next decade. Webb pulled up more files on his tablet. The operation you disrupted was just the beginning. Petrov and Kozlov were planning coordinated attacks on power grids, water systems, transportation networks, and communications infrastructure. Your analysis didn't just save lives, it prevented the collapse of American society as we know it. I looked at the scope of what we'd actually prevented, the sheer scale of destruction that had been planned. And now Petrov wants revenge. More than revenge. He wants to ensure that no one else can do what you did. Elena, eliminating you isn't just about settling scores. It's about removing the one analyst who's proven capable of unraveling operations at this level of sophistication. Victoria was already coordinating with security teams, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. Webb, what's your plan? Because right now, it looks like Elena is targeted for assassination by a foreign operative who has a compromised CIA agent as his weapon. There's one way to turn this around. We use Petrov's plan against him. I go back, tell him I'm ready to eliminate Elena, and we set up a controlled operation that allows us to capture him and his remaining associates, using me as bait. Using you as bait, confirmed Webb. But Elena, you need to understand the risks. If something goes wrong, if Petrov suspects the setup, you won't just be in danger from him, you'll be in danger from me, because I'll have to maintain my cover until the last possible moment. I looked at Victoria, then back at Webb. Here was a man who'd spent 3 years living a lie, who just had his operation blown by my father's panic, and who was now asking me to trust him with my life. Webb, how do I know you're not still working for Petrov? How do I know this entire conversation isn't part of his plan to get me to trust you before you kill me? Webb smiled grimly. Elena, you don't. That's the nature of intelligence work. Sometimes you have to make life or death decisions based on incomplete information and your instinct about people's character.
He was right, and I hated it. But as I looked at the evidence of what Petrov's organization was capable of, at the scope of the destruction they'd planned, I realized I didn't have a choice. What do you need me to do? The plan Webb proposed was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its execution. I would leave the federal building at 5:45 p.m., apparently heading home in defeat after receiving Petrov's ultimatum. Webb would follow me, maintaining the appearance of conducting surveillance for an assassination attempt. At my apartment, we would stage a confrontation that would end with my apparent death while actually capturing Petrov's communications and tracking his remaining network. But at 5:30 p.m., 15 minutes before I was supposed to leave the building, my mother called. Elena, I need to see you immediately. There's something about your father that you need to know. I almost dismissed the call. The last thing I needed was another family complication when I was preparing for what might be the most dangerous operation of my career. But something in my mother's voice stopped me. Mom, this really isn't a good time. I'm dealing with a serious situation. So am I. Elena, I'm in the lobby of your building. I told security it was a family emergency and they're letting me come up. I looked at Victoria and Webb, both of whom were staring at me with expressions of alarm. Having my mother in the building during an active counterintelligence operation was the last thing any of us needed. Elena, you need to get her out of here, Victoria said. If Petrov's people are watching the building, they'll see my mother entering and know that I'm not isolated, which could blow the entire operation. But 5 minutes later, my mother stepped off the elevator looking like I'd never seen her before. Her usual composed demeanor was gone, replaced by something that looked like barely controlled panic. She was carrying a leather briefcase that I recognized as my father's. Elena, I found this in your father's home office after you called yesterday. I think you need to see what's inside. Webb and Victoria exchanged glances, but my mother was already opening the briefcase. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Not just financial records or client communications,
but official government paperwork with CIA letterhead. Mom, where did you get these? Your father's safe. Elena, I've known the combination for years, but I never looked inside because I trusted him. After our conversation yesterday, I couldn't stop thinking about what you'd said, so I finally opened it. I picked up the first document and felt the world tilt around me. It was a CIA personnel file. My personnel file. But it wasn't a copy. It was an original document with security classifications and access logs that should never have existed outside of agency facilities. Elena, what is this? Why does your father have official CIA documents about you? Webb leaned over my shoulder to look at the file, and his expression immediately darkened. Elena, this isn't just your personnel file. Look at the access log on the bottom. I examined the document more carefully. The access log showed that this file had been checked out of CIA record storage repeatedly over the past 2 years, always by the same person, Deputy Director Harrison. The same Harrison who had confirmed Webb's identity earlier. Victoria, call Harrison right now. I need to know why he's been providing my father with classified documents about my work. But before Victoria can make the call, my mother pulled another document from the briefcase. This one made me physically sick to look at. It was a complete operational summary of Operation Blackwater, including details about my role that should have been compartmentalized even within the agency. Elena, look at this. The next document was a contract. Not a legal services agreement, but something that looked like a formal intelligence cooperation agreement. It was signed by my father, by Viktor Petrov, and by someone whose signature I recognized but couldn't immediately place. Webb was reading over my shoulder, and I heard him suck in his breath sharply. Elena, that third signature belongs to Deputy Director Harrison. The room went silent as the implications hit us. This wasn't just about my father selling information to foreign operatives. This was about a systemic compromise at the highest levels of the CIA itself. Mom, how long has Dad had these documents? I don't know. But Elena, there's something else I need to tell you, something I should have mentioned yesterday, but was too scared to say. My mother sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs, looking older than I'd ever seen her. And Lena, your father didn't just start working with questionable clients recently. He's been involved in intelligence work for over a decade. What kind of intelligence work? I don't know all the details, but I know he's been providing legal services to government agencies for years. He told me it was consulting work for the Department of Justice. But Elena, some of his clients were never legitimate businesses. They were covers for intelligence operations. Webb and Victoria were frantically cross-referencing the documents with their databases, but I could already see the pattern emerging. My father hadn't been recruited by Petrov as a random asset. He had been a long-term intelligence contractor who had been gradually turned into a double agent. Elena, look at this, Victoria said, pointing to her computer screen. I'm seeing contracts between your father's firm and various government agencies going back 12 years. But the pattern is wrong. He's been billing for services that don't match any legitimate intelligence operations. Which means your father has been operating as an unregistered intelligence contractor, providing services to both U.S. agencies and foreign clients simultaneously.
My mother pulled out one final document that made everything clear. It was a letter, written in my father's handwriting, addressed to me, but never sent. The date was from 3 years ago, right around the time I'd started working on the preliminary intelligence that would become Operation Blackwater. Elena, the letter began, if you're reading this, it means my situation has become impossible to maintain. I need you to know that everything I've done has been to protect you and your career. When I first started providing information to Deputy Director Harrison's private intelligence network, I thought I was serving my country. I didn't realize I was being used to compromise the very operations you were working to protect. The letter went on to explain that Harrison had been running an unauthorized intelligence operation for years, using lawyers like my father to gather information from foreign operatives while simultaneously selling American intelligence to those same operatives. Elena, Harrison has been using your work as a selling point to foreign buyers. Every successful operation you complete makes American intelligence more valuable on the black market. Your success as an analyst has been turned into a marketing tool for American secrets. I finished reading the letter and looked up at my mother, Webb, and Victoria. My father wasn't just selling information about my work. He was being used to sell my work itself to foreign intelligence services. Webb was already on his phone, presumably contacting his real handlers, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. Elena, this changes everything about tonight's operation. If Harrison is compromised, then Petrov has access to real-time intelligence about our counter-operation. Which means Petrov already knows that I've blown my cover. He knows we're planning to use you as bait, and he knows exactly how we're planning to do it. My mother looked around the room at the three of us, and I could see the dawn of understanding in her eyes. Elena, you're not just in danger from your father's clients. You're in danger from your own agency. She was right. The operation we'd been planning was compromised before it began. Petrov wasn't just one step ahead of us. He was being fed information by someone inside the CIA itself. Elena, Webb said quietly, I don't think the 6 p.m. deadline was ever about forcing you to cooperate. I think it was about keeping you distracted while Harrison and Petrov prepared to eliminate everyone who knows about their operation. I looked at the documents spread across the table, the evidence of betrayal that went deeper than I'd ever imagined. Including my father? Especially your father. Elena, your father isn't just a compromised asset. He's a witness to treason at the highest levels of American intelligence. And witnesses like that don't usually survive very long. 6 months after the night that changed everything, I stood in the rose garden behind our new house in Alexandria, watching my mother tend to the flowers she'd planted when we moved in together. The house was modest but secure, purchased with funds from the CIA's Witness Protection Relocation Program. It was the first home either of us had lived in that felt truly safe. My father was serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison, part of a plea agreement that had helped expose the full extent of Harrison's intelligence selling network. His testimony had been crucial in unraveling a conspiracy that had compromised American operations for over a decade. During his sentencing, he'd looked directly at me and said something I'd never expected to hear. I'm proud of the agent you became, even if I was too scared to be proud of the daughter I raised. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was understanding. And sometimes understanding was enough. Deputy Director Harrison was facing life in prison without parole. His trial had revealed the staggering scope of his operation. Over 40 compromised intelligence assets, hundreds of sold operational secrets, and direct responsibility for the deaths of at least a dozen foreign informants who had trusted American intelligence. Marcus Webb's 3-year undercover operation had provided the foundation for the prosecution, but it was my mother's discovery of those documents that had blown the case wide open. The ceremony that was supposed to recognize my work on Operation Blackwater had been postponed, then quietly canceled as the investigation expanded. But 3 weeks ago, I'd received a call from the new director of Central Intelligence, Maria Santos, asking if I'd be willing to attend a private ceremony at Langley. Agent Nightingale, she had said over our secure line, your work didn't just save American infrastructure from cyber attack. Your investigation saved American intelligence from institutional corruption. I'd like to recognize both achievements properly. So here I was, on a Saturday morning in late spring, getting ready to finally receive the recognition I never thought I wanted from people I'd learned to trust again.
Victoria knocked on the front door at exactly 10 a.m., dressed in her best suit and carrying a small gift box. Over the past 6 months, she'd become more than just my handler. She'd become the sister I'd never had, someone who understood both the professional and personal costs of the choices we'd made. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, stepping into our kitchen where my mother was arranging fresh flowers in a vase. "I think so. It's strange, though. 6 months ago, I thought this ceremony would prove to my father that I was worth being proud of. Now I know that his opinion was never the real measure of my value." My mother looked up from her flowers, her expression gentle but firm. "Elena, your father's opinion was complicated by circumstances you couldn't have known about. But you know what wasn't complicated? Your choice to protect this country even when it cost you personally. That choice was entirely your own, and it was entirely right."
In the months since that terrifying night, my mother and I had rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. She knew the details of my work now, understood the sacrifices intelligence work required, and had become one of my strongest supporters. The woman who had once worried about my career choices now kept a secure phone so the agency could reach her if I was deployed on dangerous assignments. "There's something I need to tell you before we leave," I said, sitting down at the kitchen table where we'd had so many conversations over the past months. Director Santos offered me a promotion, Division Chief for Cyber Intelligence, overseeing all operations targeting digital threats to national security. Victoria's eyes widened. "Elena, that's incredible. That's one of the most important positions in the agency." "I know, it's everything I've worked toward professionally. But there's a catch. The position requires deep cover again. I'd have to create a new identity, limit contact with family, essentially disappear from my current life for an indefinite period." My mother set down her flowers and looked at me carefully. "And what did you tell Director Santos?" I told her I needed to discuss it with my family first. For 8 years, I made career decisions in isolation, thinking that protecting my family from the truth was the same as protecting them from harm. I learned that keeping secrets doesn't protect the people you love. It makes them vulnerable to people who would exploit those secrets. Victoria nodded slowly. "So, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that there are different ways to serve your country. I can take the promotion and disappear into deep cover, protecting America from digital threats while sacrificing my personal relationships. Or I can stay in my current position, mentoring the next generation of cyber intelligence analysts while maintaining the family connections that ground me and keep me human." My mother reached across the table and took my hand. "Elena, what do you want to do?" It was the first time in my adult life that anyone had asked me that question without trying to influence my answer. My father had always told me what success should look like. The agency had always told me what duty required. But my mother was asking what I wanted, without conditions or expectations. "I want to stay. I want to keep doing important work, but I want to do it in a way that allows me to have real relationships with people I care about. I've spent 8 years being Agent Nightingale. I'd like to spend the next 8 years being Elena Thorne, who happens to be an intelligence analyst." Victoria smiled. "You know, there's something beautiful about that choice. You're not choosing between your career and your family. You're choosing to integrate them in a way that makes both stronger." We arrived at Langley an hour later, passing through security checkpoints that now felt familiar rather than intimidating. The ceremony was small, just Director Santos, a few other senior officials, my mother, Victoria, and me. But when Santos began speaking about Operation Blackwater and its impact on national security, I felt something I'd never experienced before: pride without qualification. Agent Nightingale's analysis prevented what intelligence assessment suggests would have been the most devastating cyber attack in American history. But more than that, her investigation of her own family situation led to the exposure of institutional corruption that had been compromising American intelligence for over a decade. She chose duty over personal comfort, truth over family loyalty,
And in doing so, she protected not just American infrastructure, but American intelligence itself. When Santos called my code name and asked me to stand, I saw my mother in the audience, tears streaming down her face, but her expression radiating pride. For the first time in my adult life, I was being recognized not for becoming someone else's version of success, but for being exactly who I was. Agent Elena Thorne, codenamed Nightingale, for exceptional service to your country and extraordinary courage in exposing institutional corruption, the Central Intelligence Agency is proud to present you with the Distinguished Intelligence Cross. As Santos pinned the medal to my suit jacket, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. I'd started as a daughter desperate for approval, become an agent hiding in the shadows, and emerged as someone who understood that true strength came not from secrecy or sacrifice, but from the courage to be authentic even when authenticity was dangerous. After the ceremony, as we walked back to our car, my mother asked me something that made me smile. "Elena, do you think your father would be proud of you now?" I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "I don't know, Mom, but for the first time in my life, I don't need him to be. I'm proud of myself, and that's enough." We drove home to Alexandria, to our small house with its secure locks and beautiful garden, to a life built on truth instead of secrets. And for the first time since I joined the CIA, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.